Hey patrons, coming in under the wire again this month, but here we go with our Q&A video for August 2017. You guys ask questions, I'll answer them, so let's dive right in with our first question. Take a look here. So Edward asks, what has been the hardest part about the reboot of the Ethan and Lucas comics that I've found since doing that reboot? Well, I've touched on this a little bit in the past, but the hardest part I think for me has been not putting out as much content as I thought I would have, not being as far along with it as I thought I would at this point. So that's starting to turn around a little bit. We just did a little storyline with Ethan and Lucas a little while ago. I actually have, I literally just finished the first page of another little storyline we're going to do. I'm still chipping away at issue 5 when I get free time, so hopefully that'll be out soon. So that is starting to kind of turn around. I am starting to, you know, and like I said, stepping outside of the, you know, strictly comic book issue format has freed me up a little bit to, you know, to start putting out some more, more content, some of those smaller stories that don't necessarily fit into the larger arc of a comic book. So that's helped ease my frustration with that a little bit. So with that said, that's also kind of a little bit of a boring answer, so thought I'd also touch on you know, another thing that I have found difficult with the reboot, and that is contending with my my initial impulses regarding Ethan. You know, I wrote these characters for 10 years, so when I sit down to write a story or to write a page or write a joke or whatever, a lot of times my first instinct is still tied to who the characters were. And what I mean by that, you know, in regards to Ethan, is that I'll come up with an idea or a reaction for him to something that, while funny, also makes him come off as a bit of an asshole. You know, or a general nuisance to the people, to either, you know, friends or just the general public or whatever. And so the challenge for me has been, you know, when that happens, is sort of to then step back and take that idea, and rather than just running with it at face value for a cheap gag, is to develop it further and to work it further and to see, you know, and how I can evolve it into something that serves both of my purposes, which is obviously to entertain, but also to put forth this, you know, more likable version of Ethan. So yeah, so that's just, you know, something that can be a little challenging, is adhering to my new vision for these characters. Okay, so next up, David says, I'm reading through the box set comics and have just read the early parts of the Ethan and Lila relationship. How much of that is autobiographic? First of all, thank you for picking up that box set. To answer your question, not really a whole lot, actually. And this goes for the comic as a whole. I never really drew directly on events in my life for material for the comics. It was more about taking a general feeling or a general inspiration from things that I've been through or things that I've seen friends go through, and just using that as a jumping off point to tell a story. You know, I mean, a good example of what I mean by that is Ethan and Lucas themselves visually were based off of myself and my best friend Toby at the time. But then that's really where the similarity stopped. I mean, you know, I had this idea for a comic about, you know, a couple best friends who sat around and played video games, and that was something we did, so, you know, I used our general appearance, but the personalities and the experiences that those characters went through don't really follow a parallel with my life or Toby's life or anything that, you know, we necessarily experienced. So it was just, in general, it was more about taking the essence of things that I've experienced and then using that to inform a story that I wanted to tell. But otherwise, yeah, there's not a lot of direct correlation between Ethan's life and my life. Okay, and finally this month we have a question from Juan Alberto, who asks, is there a way where we can buy or get the digital copies of the 2 original analog and D-pad comics, since they weren't included in the Control-Alt-Delete 1.0 box set? So first things first, there were actually 3 original analog and D-pad comics. One went unpublished. Issue 2 ended in a bit of a cliffhanger, and we did finish issue 3, But because at the time I was putting these out in print, there were no really strong options for digital distribution for an independent publisher like myself. And once issue 3 never went to print and I kind of fell off of pursuing that series, issue 3 got stuck in a drawer and was never really released. So obviously I did have an opportunity to put those into the Control-Alt-Delete 1.0 box set, and actually this bit of content is the only thing from that 10 years I decided not to put in there, and there are a couple reasons for that. The first reason is that those original Analog and D-Pad comics were done in traditional comic book size, which is slightly taller and thinner than the regular comics that I drew, which had a slightly squarer shape to them. So the book was formatted long ways, and in order to put a taller and narrower page into that book, they'd have to be shrunk down quite a bit. So I didn't really like the way the comic book pages ended up layout-wise in the size of the book that had been designed pretty much around every other comic that I'd drawn for that 10-year period, that certain size that I'd used. And the second reason was, because I have started up Analog and D-Pad again. It's the focus of this new reboot. It's, it's the current main canon, and I'm putting out these issues, and I'm putting out these, this content both on the website and the Patreon one-shots, and eventually I'm going to collect all of that into a book. It's going to be after issue 5 is done. I'm going to take those first 5 issues, and any other Control-Alt-Delete 2.0 stuff with Ethan and Lucas in it, and I'm going to put it all into one book. And in the back of that book, you're going to find those original 3 issues of the first iteration of Analog and D-Pad. It just felt to me like that would be the most appropriate place to put those issues. Sort of if someone's picking up a book of just Ethan and Lucas Analog and D-Pad stuff, that in the back, to include like, hey, take a look at this. This is like the original version of these characters. Here's these 3 bonus issues. It just felt like a better home for that content. So, to very specifically answer your question, there will be a way for you to get those issues, and that'll be included with the Analog and D-Pad, the first Analog and D-Pad volume or collection, which will probably be available digitally and in print. So hopefully I'll put that together like either later this year or early next year. Like I said, mostly it just hinges on issue 5 being finished. So that's it for this month, guys. Thank you so much for for your questions. I really enjoy providing answers for you guys and getting a chance to provide you with this information. And thank you so much for your support through Patreon. And we'll see you next month.